Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend some time with The Nature of Consciousness, Essays on the Unity of Mind and Matter by Rupert Spira. Yeah, I know, a light topic, right? This collection of essays was originally published in 2017, and it's the first book by Rupert Spira that I've read. And so I really wanted to give this a go because I've been really interested in consciousness studies over the last couple of years, and I've read several books on the topic and chatted about them here on my channel. But this collection is really interesting. The introduction actually describes what it's about, and so I thought I would just read this excerpt, which really gives a good description of the book in general, this collection in general. It says, in this book, it is suggested that consciousness is the fundamental underlying reality of the apparent duality of mind and matter, and that the overlooking, forgetting, or ignoring of this reality is the root cause of both the existential unhappiness that pervades and motivates most people's lives and the wider conflicts that exist between communities and nations. So he's saying that this misunderstanding about what consciousness is really at the root of most modern problems, I believe he's trying to say. So he talks about, in the first chapter, he talks about the I. You know, when you think of yourself and your consciousness, you think of I. I am sad. I am happy. I am tired. I am sick. I am busy. So all of those things, though, are experiences. So you're not busy. That is not your definition of who you are. You're not always busy. You're not always tired. I am. So the root thing that you are, he says, the I that you are is I am. So it's consciousness, and he calls this awareness. And he's saying, like, only awareness is aware. And that is actually the title of chapter 2. Only awareness is aware. There's a quote here that says, however, it is not I, the body, that is aware. It is I, the awareness, that is aware. A body doesn't have awareness. Awareness has the experience of body. So I think that's really interesting in that, you hear this term, I think, therefore I am, and I think he's arguing that it's the other way around. I am, therefore I think. Chapter 3, he talks a bit about panpsychism and the consciousness-only model, and I find the subject of panpsychism super interesting, and I read a book called Panpsychism in the West by David Skirbina a while back, and I chatted that here on my channel, so check that out if you're interested. He has some criticisms of this. This is a very old philosophical approach going all the way back to the Greeks, if not before, and he has some problems or some limitations he feels like that are in that sort of philosophy, but I found this chapter really interesting. And then he talks about, in chapter 4, he talks about the difference between consciousness and objects. And again, he calls consciousness, sometimes he calls it consciousness in the essays, and sometimes he calls it awareness. And the quote here says, in its native condition, awareness has no objective qualities, for any objective quality has a form, and anything that has a form is known. It does not know, it's known. It does not know. Awareness is the non-objective knower of all objective knowledge and experience. It is pure knowing or being aware. He uses an analogy of a movie versus the screen. So the movie obscures, so when you're watching a movie, you're actually not watching a movie, he argues. You're actually watching a screen. The thing that's unchangeable is the screen. It doesn't matter what movie or what state, what objects are being projected onto the screen, you're really just watching the screen. And I think that's just so fascinating, really, to think about. I just love this metaphor about consciousness as a screen, right? As a movie screen. And I guess, your life, your experiences, the you that you normally identify with yourself would be the movie. And I think that's really interesting. One other thing he talks about with the I and the I am is, how you think of yourself as a consistent I throughout your entire life. Although if I were to ask you, are you the same person that you were when you were 4 years old? You would say no, because you've changed, right? You're not You don't think the same, but yet on another level, you are. There is a continuity because that what is underlying all of the I there is your consciousness as an unchanging, as the screen, although the movie has changed over the course of your life. So I think that's just really fascinating. So he talks about in chapter 5 the direct path to enlightenment. And he talks about how science and psychology, they study, or they think they study consciousness, but he argues that they're not really studying consciousness, they're studying behavior, or they're studying experience or mechanisms of experience, not really consciousness in and of itself. I think that he says they're studying the movie rather than the screen. And he argues here in this essay that, you can't, only consciousness can study itself. So there's a few quotes here that I think really illustrate this chapter really well. The first one says, "The study of awareness is a unique science in that it is entirely between awareness and itself. In the East, it is known as meditation. In the West, it is known as prayer. Although the practice of meditation has been reduced by popular culture to a means of relieving stress and anxiety. In its original form, it is the means by which awareness has access to its knowledge of itself." So then he goes on to say, "Likewise, although through the ages the practice of prayer has become the means whereby a personal self supplicates an external God, in its original meaning it was understood to be the means by which the finite mind surrenders its limitations and is revealed to itself in its original irreducible form." He talks about how anyone can access this path, and he says the direct path requires no spiritual or religious affiliation or background. No preparatory practice is required for the simple recognition that being aware, or awareness itself, is the essential, irreducible, indivisible element of all experience, to which we refer as I or myself. None has privileged access to it. It is equally available to all people, in all places, under all circumstances, and in all situations. Even though religions largely have developed around this idea of awareness or consciousness being aware of itself, that anybody can access it through this, beginning by acknowledging that awareness is what is the ultimate unchangeable you and me, because it's the same. Consciousness is consciousness. There is only awareness, he argues. So we only have one ultimately, and we'll talk more about that here in a bit. Chapter 6 is called Self-Inquiry and Self-Remembering. And he says here, just as, he's talking here about just as the movie screen doesn't need to separate itself from the movie to know that it doesn't share the limitations or the destiny of the characters, right? So the screen knows that it's the screen, and it's at peace with whatever experience gets projected onto it. The screen knows that it's not the movie, and your and my consciousness or awareness knows that it's not my experience. So my experience is not me. Only consciousness is me, I think is what he's trying to say there. As I said, it's a little difficult to talk about this, although I found it a lot of fun to read. It does get kind of confusing sometimes. Chapter 10 the title of this chapter is called Existence is Identical to Awareness. There's a quote here that describes this essay. It says, "The question, why is there a world, should be reformulated in the light of this understanding as, why is there a finite mind? There isn't. The finite mind is only a finite mind from the perspective of a finite mind." So we often think that there is a finite, discrete me that is my mind, but that is just my finite mind's definition of itself. So chapter 13 talks about states of consciousness and how there really are no states of consciousness. There is only consciousness. And so it talks about the dream state versus the waking state, and how the waking state thinks that it's the primary one. It's the screen. It's the movie that thinks it's the screen. So he goes on to say, the fact that no one has ever found or could ever find anything outside consciousness has not deterred most people in general, and scientists and philosophers in particular, from believing matter to be the ultimate reality of the universe, although this is now beginning to change. So I think that's really interesting, again, that, it's from the standpoint of the mind, matter is all there really is, but from the standpoint of consciousness, it is actually all there really is, because it's the screen. Matter is part of the movie. So to me, that kind of also goes back to panpsychism in the West. This book discusses that topic a bit, which I think explains it really well in this book, as far as the consciousness of of everything. All matter has consciousness, even subatomic level has a certain degree of consciousness, and then this book explains sort of how that aggregates and becomes something like a human, as opposed to the dining room table. So yeah, I think it's just fascinating. So chapter 10, he talks about the shared medium of the minds. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, meaning that consciousness there's an infinite consciousness, right? So my consciousness is in some way connected to yours, because ultimately it's the same consciousness. And it says at the deepest level, all minds are connected because they are all precipitated within the same field of infinite consciousness. And the varying degrees of connectedness that we feel with one another or with animals, objects, and nature are the degrees to which our minds are transparent to this shared medium. Love is the word we use when we feel this shared medium with other people and animals. The same experience is referred to as beauty in relation to objects. And I just love that thought. I think that is just fantastic. I think that's a wonderful sort of thing to think about what love is and how that's a connection of consciousness. And I think that's just beautiful. Finally, I'm going to end the chat with this quote that he mentions I think it's actually in the introduction, but he talks about, or maybe at the end, I'm not really sure where it fell in the book, but I think it's a beautiful quote. It says, "A truly civilized culture is one in which all branches of knowledge, politics, psychology, medicine, science, sociology, economics, philosophy, the arts, and religion are founded upon the recognition of the eternal, infinite nature of awareness, the ultimate reality of all experience that knows itself alike in each one of us as I or I am, irrespective of nationality, age, gender, race, creed, education, health, or wealth." And I think that's a beautiful thought to end this chat on. So I will end the chat there. I did enjoy and got a lot from reading this collection of essays. So glad to have gotten that read. My next chat, though, switches gears quite a bit to a crime drama. Let me pull up the cover. I have finished this already. I've fallen a little behind on my book chats, but I will have a book chat on Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead coming up in the near future. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, take care.